DevStream 12 gave us our first look at what's coming in Preludes 13, and my first impressions are pretty mixed. There are some great improvements coming, but there's also a few things I'm not so sure about. So let's talk about it. Let's start with Virtue Prisms. Starting in Preludes 13, these prisms will control how your virtue points are assigned. So we're still going to have virtue points that you gain through leveling up your Envoy, but now your prism will decide how many points go into each virtue. I love the artwork on these prisms. I am very happy to see that our point values are still visible, and I like that the prisms come in different strengths. We'll even have more options than the 7 I initially predicted, and while this is not quite as customizable as being able to allocate points yourself, I think this still gives us plenty of variety for buildcraft. However, I do have some pretty big concerns, and the first of those is how you get prisms. Everyone will start out with the prism aligned with their starting pact, as well as the wild prisms for any wild pacts they have, but other prisms were described as earnable, which means you'll have to farm for your prisms. Imagine if our current virtue system made you farm an item to unlock the plus and minus buttons on each of your virtues. Well, that's what the prisms will be, except it will be even worse because instead of just unlocking 3 sets of buttons, you'll have to farm each individual allocation prism. This is a terrible idea. Some things do need to be grindy in a game like Soulframe. Powerful weapons, endgame armor sets, blessed joinery, these things all make sense as rewards for an in-game grind. But virtues aren't something I want to grind for, they are what I want to grind with. As much as I like how your equipped prism will be attached to your loadout slot, letting us easily switch between different builds without having to manually redo our virtue points, I do not think these prisms should be treated like every other item in the game to be farmed and collected. All prisms should be available to all players from the moment they create their character. Let us get creative and play with builds and see what things do. DE, you asked for our feedback, so here is mine. Please don't lock prisms behind a grind. I think the system could be really fun, but asking new players to grind out access to the game's base mechanics is too much. Give everyone all the prisms. If you have to delay P13 to make it happen, I will celebrate that decision. Virtues will function very differently in Preludes 13, although I'm still not very clear on exactly how this is going to work in some cases. The one part I do understand and am very excited about is that Pact Arcanics will now scale with their attuned virtue. So, using Siren as an example, Pictrix Powder is your courage ability, so it will now scale with courage, Trick of the Light as your spirit ability will scale with spirit, and Glamour being your grace ability will scale with grace. I am so happy to hear that they are giving this a try. Finally, the virtue associations for the Arcanics make sense. This is a simple and intuitive system, and it gives us good reasons to build around different virtues or to split our focus between several virtues. Overall, I love the idea and I can't wait to try it. Unfortunately, this is not all that virtues will do, and I am still very confused about the rest. Steve gave us some very general descriptions, and they left me with more questions than answers. Spirit will let you
cast tons and tons more.
So does that mean you get cooldown reduction from Spirit? Stealth attack damage scales with Grace, but does that mean only attacks on unalerted enemies? Courage makes your weapons more effective, but does that mean all weapons? And what does Blessed Joinery do? I'm trying to withhold judgment here until I see how everything works in-game, but I'm a bit concerned based on what I heard. Pact abilities are very, very strong, so if my understanding about Spirit and cooldown reduction is correct, then we may be trading a Courage meta for a Spirit meta. The ways that attunements affect weapon damage is changing, as is the effect for Blessed Joinery, which is interesting, but it's tough to have an opinion on it right now because what we heard in the dev stream was more conceptual than concrete. Look at this screenshot of these Blessed Clivers. What do all these attunement pips mean? Does it scale with Courage and Grace, but more strongly with Grace? Do the pips still indicate the strength of scaling? Do weapons still have an attunement cap, and if so, how will we find them without being able to manually allocate points? And this is my biggest concern with what we've seen so far of how this new system actually works. It is very complicated and counterintuitive, and that is even more true for armor attunements. Steve and Scott talked about changes to stability, which had me really excited at first, but it sounds like they are just doubling down on the current system and trying to make it work better. I think this is a mistake. If you didn't already know, because even I didn't realize this until about a month ago, here's how I think Stagger currently works in Soulframe. Each incoming attack deals a certain amount of Stagger, and your stability reduces that number in the same way that armor reduces damage. The amount of Stagger you take is checked against several thresholds. Those thresholds determine whether your character continues fighting, gets interrupted, or gets knocked down. I have no idea what those thresholds are numerically. The only place we can see stagger values in-game is in the info cards for each weapon. Everything else is just guesswork through trial and error. This is an entirely separate mechanic from the stability bar, which will also knock you down if it fills. The two systems do seem to overlap, but they function independently from one another. And there are some special attacks that will knock you prone regardless of your stability rating, unless they just deal so much stagger that it's impossible to get our stability that high. I don't actually know because we can't see any of these values and nothing in-game explains this. So there are at least 2 and possibly 3 separate, overlapping yet independent mechanics that can knock me down, and the game doesn't explain any of them. And rather than simplifying that and reworking armor through these virtue changes, now we have to consider all those same mechanics and how each of them scale with virtues. So my big question for DE here is, if plus and minus buttons on the virtues is too complicated, then how does this stagger system make sense? Maybe I'd have a more favorable view of these changes if I knew how they worked, but this highly complicated and extremely opaque system feels completely contrary to the stated goal of simplifying Soulframe's mechanics. I'm very glad that DE decided to wait until after the dev stream to get some feedback before releasing Preludes 13. I think there's a lot to like in what they showed of these new systems, but I also think some of the planned changes will not be good for the future of the game, and I really hope they reconsider. But as I've said before, I'm just one Envoy and this game is for all of us, so share your opinion too. Next, let's take a quick look at some of the other things we saw that are coming in Preludes 13. New faces and hairstyles will be selectable through Verminia, and while this was not explicitly stated during the stream, it sounds like some of the options might need to be purchased with arcs, which seems pretty fair to me. Face markings will be removed for now, but will be coming back in the future. Verminia will also allow us to customize the colors on our packed arms. There was no mention of packed arm transmog just yet, but I am so excited to finally be able to change packed arm colors. I see hours of soul-style customization in my future. The Prelude's Honor Talisman will now be given out to all players at each Prelude, and then after launch there will be some type of anniversary event that allows future players to earn it as well. The devs do not want any item to be fully unattainable to future players, and I think that is a smart choice for the long-term health of the game. We'll be getting 3 new weapons in P13, a new staff called Seathorn, new fire magic gauntlets called Basker's Rest, and new dual short blade sidearms called Clivers. These all look super cool and the water magic sound effects are awesome. And speaking of sound effects, audio cues got some huge improvements, including better blocking sounds and a new sound effect to let us know when packed Arcanics are off cooldown. These are both excellent improvements and are sure to make combat feel a lot better. The combat camera and player physics changes that we'd heard about previously all seem to be fine-tuning for our current systems, not any big reworks or system changes. What they shared on the dev stream does sound pretty encouraging, but I was hoping for some bigger changes, like an option to use my reticle for targeting. Then again, the current system could be pretty good with some polish, so I want to see how it feels to play before I formulate my opinion. We saw a bit of a teaser for a new game mode called the Organ, where we'll get to climb up and disable the Odin towers that were added in P12. And we saw half of a fight with a Vadagar bear, and both of those fights look pretty fun. The music for the Organ is incredible. I hope they put it on Spotify. Faction Tales will now be selectable at World Trees, and in this clip you can also see the Organ as one of the options. This is such a wonderful improvement for Soulframe. Grinding will be much more efficient and enjoyable with more control over what type of tale you take. We also saw some concept art towards the end of the stream, including a new pact and armor set, which Jeff said would be coming with a fencing sword. This looks like a Night Maiden pact to me. Maybe our Mother's Pact? We also saw concept art for an Omen Ram, both with and without corruption. This is confirmed to be our next Omen Beast, but I think by next they meant after the Omen Toad, because at the very end of the stream, Sydney blessed us with her adorable cat and also a poem, beautifully performed, which alludes to the much-awaited Omen Toad. I was expecting the Omen Toad to get pushed back to P14, but maybe I'm wrong and that will be in P13 after all. The last thing I want to mention is that Envoy Hour will be returning on February 10th at 4 p.m. Eastern. I am very glad that we will have another opportunity to ask questions and get more information about all these changes, presumably after we've had time to try them out. We don't have a solid release date yet for Preludes 13 and did not get any further clarification during the stream. The last we heard from Steve during Warframe's dev short was that it would hopefully be this Monday or Tuesday, so February 2nd or 3rd. As much as I am excited to try out the new Virtue system, I would still rather they delay the update than make us grind for prisms, but what do you think? Should all prisms be accessible from game start, or is it okay to grind for virtues? And what do you think of the stability and stagger thresholds? Let me know in the comments. And until next time, happy hunting!